and he is supposedly at 2 o'clock in the morning looking for deer antlers or deer scat, and he comes across the body. I mean, that makes no sense to any of us.
Penny was directly accused of covering up the death of her son. Philip Klein accused the sheriff's office of planting the iPhone, while the sheriff pointed the finger at Klein. It remained unclear if Tom's death was accidental or an act of suicide or homicide. This case is as confusing as it is tragic. The only thing that is certain about this case is that someone is lying. Klein held a town hall meeting in Canadian where he proclaimed he would finally reveal all the facts.
What is going on, guys, and welcome back to another video. So this video is different from anything I've ever posted, and it is a video of a cold case, a murder case, suicide case, homicide. No one knows yet, but it is one of the craziest cases I've ever seen in my entire life, on video, on TV, anything. And it just happened 70 miles from my house. So this story hits close to home, which is why I'm sharing the story. I want to get more eyes on the story. It is absolutely insane, so I am posting it, but this is not my video. This is Kevin's video from Just Thought Lounge. So go subscribe to him. Do not subscribe to me. Go subscribe to Kevin. I asked him if I could post this story on my YouTube, and he said, sure, go for it. So that is awesome of him to let me do it. Go subscribe to Kevin. Link is in the description. Again, one of the craziest cases ever. This case involves a murdered high school student, an incompetent sheriff spreading rumors, hiding information and not fully investigating the case, high school football game gambling, multiple cover-ups, private investigators, the mother and brother possibly being involved in his death. It is just one of the most insane cases I've ever seen in my life, and here it is. Again, go subscribe to Kevin. Here's the story.
Hi everyone, I'm Kevin, and this is Just Thought Lounge. This is the true crime channel that delivers serious, well-balanced coverage of the cases that really make you think. You may have heard of the case we're about to look at today, but you may not have heard the whole story. This case is as confusing as it is tragic. The small town of Canadian, Texas found itself forever changed on Thanksgiving Day 2016. That was the day that local teenager Thomas Brown's Dodge Durango was found abandoned, parked along a rarely used road, doors unlocked but keys missing. Tom had not come home the night before, and no one had heard from him. Over the next several years, right up to today, the efforts of law enforcement and a private investigator have uncovered more and more evidence relating to Tom's disappearance. But instead of each discovery leading closer to the truth, it seemed that the more that was found, the more confounding Tom's disappearance became, and the more unlikely the suspects that could be involved. Theories of what could have happened have been proposed by the multiple agencies involved and others close to the investigation. Most of them have been plausible, but many seemed extremely unlikely. The only thing that is certain about this case is that someone is lying. This is the mysterious case of Thomas Brown. Let's take a look. In the autumn of 2016, Thomas Brown was a senior in high school and had been named class president for 2 years running. At 6'1" and about 180 pounds, Tom was an offensive lineman on the football team and was named a starter for the season. He had also recently taken up public speaking with the 4-H club, winning a top 10 spot in a state competition. Tom Brown had an eclectic range of interests. He was an avid reader who also loved video games and wrestling, and along with his wide-ranging interests was a diverse group of friends. Tom was the kind of kid in high school that was a friend to everyone. No one had a bad word to say about him. A super funny guy, he just loved to make other people laugh. At home, Tom's mother Penny and stepfather Chris Meek made a happy home based on Christian principles. His older brother Tucker had already left for college. November 23, 2016 was Thanksgiving Eve in the US. In small-town Canadian, Tom Brown headed out to meet up with friends, leaving at just after 6 p.m. in the family's red Dodge Durango. Recent high school graduates who had left for college had returned to the town for the holiday weekend, including Tom's older brother Tucker, as well as his good friend Christian Webb. Christian had graduated valedictorian of her class the year prior and had moved to study at Oklahoma State University. That night, Tom met with Christian and 2 other school friends whose families also have deep roots in the community, Michael Castletine and Caleb King. Canadian did not have much to offer for teenagers out for a night on the town. The plan was to cruise around in the Durango, taking the standard route that Tom liked to drive. The group convened at the parking lot of the middle school where they parked their respective vehicles. Then they all piled into Tom's truck. It was not common for Tom to miss his midnight curfew, even by a few minutes. At only 10 minutes past the hour, Tom's mother Penny was already concerned that something was wrong. So she texted him, but there was no response. Tucker messaged also with the same result. There was no reply from Tom. Their first text showed that they were read, but there was no response. The second text sent came up as undelivered. After a call went unanswered, Penny thought he might be in a wreck, so both she and Tucker set out in separate vehicles, Tucker with a friend of his to drive Tom's regular route and check for him. After 75 minutes, Penny returned home while Tucker continued to look. The group had parted ways at roughly 11 p.m. that night from the middle school parking lot after making plans to meet up again the next day. Christian, Michael, and Caleb had each made it home safely, but Tom could not be located. Penny made the call to the sheriff's office at 2:30 a.m. While Tucker drove around with a sheriff's deputy scouting all of Tom's regular spots, Christian Webb's father, Trey, a helicopter pilot, took to the sky. By early morning, he was flying over Canadian and the surrounding area with Christian scanning for a sighting of Tom's red SUV from the air. At about 8:40 a.m. Thanksgiving morning, it had been spotted, parked under a tree off of a gated side road not far from the community recreation center. The gate to the road had been left open. The vehicle was parked on its own, and there was no sign of Tom Brown. The Durango was in a notably odd location. Indeed, Tom's family and friends were surprised to find that the area even existed, and everyone doubted that Tom knew of that road or had ever accessed it before. Footprints were clearly visible on the dirt ground near the driver's side door. Within feet of these prints on the ground was a fresh urine mark, indicating that someone had relieved themselves very recently directly next to the truck. The doors were unlocked. Michael's debit card was retrieved from where it had fallen between the seats, but none of Tom's possessions were inside. His keys, wallet, and phone were absent. Tom's backpack, which he often kept in the back of the truck and would have typically held his school laptop, was also missing. The clues inside and around the truck to this point could have indicated that Tom had collected his things and abandoned the vehicle, likely leaving on foot. If, that is, it were not for two additional and crucial pieces of evidence that pointed to foul play. A .25 caliber shell casing was found on the floorboard, and a small but clear bloodstain was visible on the door handle of the driver's side. There was a second bloodstain, also very small, reported in the vehicle, but its location was not disclosed. Hemphill County Sheriff Nathan Lewis, 32 years old, had been elected to his post 2 months previous. Known primarily for his work tracking down illegal drug activity, Sheriff Lewis had yet to take on a missing persons case. Not surprisingly, these cases do not arise in Canadian very often. The sheriff's office processed Tom's vehicle to the extent they believed was possible. The amount of dust and dirt in the interior of the SUV meant that lifting fingerprints was reportedly impossible. The streak of blood near to the door handle was Tom's, however, it had dried considerably, leading investigators to believe that the stain was quite old, perhaps the result of a minor cut on a finger from weeks earlier. No gunpowder residue and no further blood spatter was identified by the sheriff's team. They concluded that there was nothing to indicate that a gun had gone off within the car, except for the casing, of course, on which they found no fingerprints. It was reported that the urine found next to the truck was never tested. 24 hours after the discovery of Tom's Dodge Durango, it was towed back to the family home and left in Penny's possession. Sheriff Lewis said that they no longer needed it, a decision that did not sit well with Penny and the family. The sheriff changed his mind only a day later, collected the truck again, re-ran for prints, came up with nothing on the second round of processing, and then again returned the vehicle. Canadian is not a town watched over by many CCTV cameras. However, there were a few that managed to capture the movement of Tom's truck that night. The timeline outlined by Christian, Michael, and Caleb played out as described. They drove a common loop around town with Tom, stopping at an old bridge for a walk and ending the night at the school parking lot at roughly 11 to 11:15 p.m. The school camera showed Tom exiting the lot at 11:26 after chatting with Christian for a while. The other two boys had already left. There were no cameras at the local gas station, Frank's Oil and Gas, that would have captured Tom stopping to fill his tank. At least the sheriff's office did not find such a camera. A school friend told Penny days later that he drove past Frank's at about 11:30 that night and viewed Tom getting gas. Tom used his mother's debit card for the purchase. It was an hour and a half later, but only a half a mile away from that same gas station, now well past Tom's curfew, that a Dodge Durango was captured by a security camera from the Abraham Trading Company on the corner of 2nd Street in Maine, driving in the direction of his house. It is impossible to see who the driver of the Durango is from the footage. 1 minute after the initial capture at 1:11 a.m., the Durango is seen again on the same camera, now driving in the opposite direction. Already out searching, Tucker's vehicle was captured on the same camera, heading in the same direction less than 10 minutes later. 2 more unexplained sightings were recorded in the early morning hours. At 5:28 a.m., the truck was again headed back towards Tom's house, only to reverse course 2 minutes later and captured driving in the opposite direction towards town. The next key sighting was at 5:56 a.m. outside of the recreation center, near to where Tom's vehicle would be found hours later. It showed the truck turning onto the obscure road that seemed unknown to anyone but select locals. It is not seen returning. There were no other vehicles shown going in or out of the area. Searches began around the broader terrain surrounding where the SUV was found, as well as around the recreation center, along the Canadian River, scanning Lake Marvin and the wildlife reserve in the days, weeks, and months that followed. At one point, dogs managed to catch a scent that led out towards the edge of the tree line, but seemed to lose the path at that point. In January 2017, Tom's backpack containing his school laptop and various other personal items was located along Lake Marvin Road, sitting just behind a fence, propped upright, as though it had been intentionally placed or left there.
In the backpack, there's the computer. The big question is why was the backpack out on Lake Marvin Road? And that's a huge question. Was it thrown there? Was it placed there? What was the deal?
The bag had slightly sunken into the ground and was moldy and wet from months of rain. The information on the laptop was analyzed for anything relevant, but nothing was found. Frustrated with the lack of progress and growing tensions between Tom's family and the county sheriff's office, Penny hired a private investigations team to take on the case and called for the sheriff to hand over the investigation to another agency. The growing animosity between Penny and Sheriff Lewis had a long history stretching years previous when Lewis, as a deputy in a neighboring county, had independently taken the initiative one night to scold Tom and some of his friends for hanging out around a movie theater after hours. Tom had accused Deputy Lewis of singling him out during this episode, cursing at him and unnecessarily placing him in the back of his squad car in an act of intimidation. The teenagers were out late, but they had done nothing wrong. Penny filed a formal complaint against Lewis and also took active steps to vocalize her negative opinion of him around Canadian when he stood for election as sheriff. Her efforts failed, of course, when he was awarded the position. Lewis's subsequent role leading the investigation into Tom's disappearance was not ideal. Penny did not trust the county sheriff and relied instead on the work of her private investigator. Philip Klein, a well-known missing persons investigator in Texas with a reputation of taking on the trickiest cases and a track record of finding people that do not want to be found, was hired by Penny Meek and descended on Canadian to commence his investigation. He started by making contact with the sheriff and others involved. A no-nonsense and somewhat arrogant, but mostly successful investigator, Klein's approach was immediately met with backlash from law enforcement, as he started to point fingers in unexpected directions and ask questions about some unlikely suspects. The private investigations team were not impressed with the efforts made to date by the sheriff's office. Nathan Lewis was refusing requests made by the PI team for access to evidence or basic information that would assist their efforts. And Klein found their initial theories of what had happened to Tom to be laughable, if the situation was not so tragic. Proposals that Tom had simply walked off to start a new life, for instance, were illogical given the circumstances. He had no money, he had not used his social security number to get a job, and appeared to have no motivation to take such steps. The shell casing alone should have been sufficient to indicate that foul play had occurred in Klein's view, a conclusion that the sheriff had not yet reached, or simply would not admit. They were entertaining the idea, however, that Tom may have committed suicide. His former girlfriend, Sage Pennington, a college student from out of town, reportedly told Lewis that Tom had recently begun to wear adult diapers, a fetish that he reportedly had for years. Tom was fearful that students at his high school would find out. Penny was insistent that these rumors were fabrications and that her son did not wear diapers. Klein went so far as to assert that this rumor was created by Sheriff Lewis himself as part of a campaign of distractions to divert attention away from the sheriff's own incompetence in dealing with the investigation. What was clear, however, was that Tom was going through a few negative changes in his life. Only a few months prior, Tom and Sage had broken up. This was a decision that he outwardly appeared happy with. The relationship had turned long distance after Sage left for college, so the split was a logical choice, he had said. No hard feelings, they remained close friends. The breakup coincided with Tom's exit from the football team. After a decision had been made to make him second string, he quit the Wildcats entirely, not wishing to spend the entire season watching the games from the bench. And so, when Penny sat down with Sheriff Lewis for the first time in the days immediately following Tom's disappearance, she stated that her first thought was that Tom had killed himself. Perhaps he was distraught about his breakup. She said that she had not noted any outward signs of depression in her son, but this ran in the family. Her father had taken his own life at a campsite a few miles from Lake Marvin Road years earlier. He died of a gunshot wound. Tom had learned of this only months earlier. As a child, he had believed that his grandfather died of a heart attack. Even if it could be accepted that Tom had chosen suicide by gunshot, he should have been found with the shell casing, which he obviously was not. Also, all guns in the household that he may have had access to had been accounted for. They did not own a .25 caliber pistol, and Tom did not like guns.
You didn't check my son's car? No. We don't need to. Why? He's a runaway. And I'm sorry I have to say it like this. He is a runaway that wears diapers, that pees in diapers, that is queer, and that is probably in North or South Carolina or California. That's what we think. Why do we say that? Is that a theory? Is it? No, that's what the sheriff told him.
One of the first steps undertaken by Klein was to re-examine the physical evidence. Luminol testing conducted inside of the Dodge Durango aimed to illuminate any blood stains in the interior that were invisible to the naked eye. When Klein conducted the test, he said, "It lit up like a Christmas tree," revealing stains around the console, the driver's seat, and the inside of the door. What Klein seemed to have uncovered was evidence of a murder and explanation for the existence of the .25 caliber casing. In addition, a well-trained cadaver dog, Chance, was brought in to assist. Chance unambiguously and rapidly indicated at the interior of the Dodge Durango. Klein now believed that a dead body had been inside the truck at some point in time.
Two things. Number one, we put up a photo showing Chance, the cadaver dog, and how the dog hit on the automobile. Cadaver dogs are specially trained to only hit on cadaver scent. So he hit on the cadaver scent inside the car. Second, after that happened, we secured the car and we put it in a warehouse, and bit by bit we luminol the car, which is we sprayed luminol in the car and then we turned the special light on. When that happened, we were shocked. We found, which was an enormous amount of glow inside the car, and then we began the luminol down towards the floor, and we found a pooling area of blood. So our theory has been, and has always been, that that somebody must have come up behind Tom while he was sitting in the car and shot him in the head.
There were some potential issues with the luminol testing. Presumably, if the stains revealed by the luminol were from the night of Tom's disappearance, someone would have needed to thoroughly clean up the vehicle itself. But no one, including the family who received the truck back the next day, noted any signs that the cab had been cleaned. It did not smell of cleaning products. In fact, it was notably very dusty and dirty throughout. So what explains the illuminated portions? The Attorney General's office assessed the photos released by Klein and claimed that he performed the testing inaccurately. They said that he failed to follow the instructions for the luminol testing properly by including an additional light source in the process, which would ruin the results. The use of this extra source caused areas to falsely appear lit with bloodstains where there were none. They pointed specifically to one photo, unfortunately low quality, in which Philip Klein's own shirt appears to be illuminated during the testing, but presumably his shirt had not been covered with blood. Klein began organizing searches surrounding Lake Marvin Road, stemming out from the location where Tom's backpack had been found. In October 2017, he arranged for a group of volunteers to head out to a yet undisclosed area, notifying the sheriff's department 48 hours in advance of the exact regions that they planned to comb through. Items of potential interest were located almost immediately. An iPhone, the same model as Tom's, was found in the grass along the side of the road a few miles from the backpack's location. They also found a black leather gun holster, about the same size as one that would hold a .25 caliber handgun. No gun was found, and there was nothing more than speculation linking the holster to Tom's case. But when tests came back on the iPhone, the PI team was shocked, as were law enforcement. They had found Tom's iPhone. The phone had been found in near perfect condition. It appeared to the naked eye to have been left outside no more than a few hours at most, certainly not an entire year. The grass in which the phone sat had been mowed several times in the weeks prior, though not a scratch was seen on the device. Since the time of Tom's disappearance, Hemphill County had experienced 26 inches of rain and one major ice storm over the winter, but the moisture indicators on the phone had not been activated. It cannot be stated with 100% certainty, but law enforcement and the private investigators agreed on one central fact. The phone had not been in that location for very long. It had most likely been planted that morning to be found by the search team. Philip Klein accused the sheriff's office of planting the iPhone, while the sheriff pointed the finger at Klein.
But it's just strange that Phil calls this big search on Lake Marvin Road, and then just a couple of feet off the road in the bar ditch we have a cell phone. Now, how is that?
And it hadn't had much weather as well.
No weather. The phone is in outstanding condition. The phone has been kept somewhere. And I just have a problem with, and it could be somebody in town that had the cell phone and threw it out there knowing that there was a search. But on the other hand, you have to think about Phil coming in here with this big show, right? Placing the cell phone out there. We don't know it, we don't have any evidence. And I'm not going to accuse Phil of that, by no means. But we have to think about every possibility and every angle that the cell phone got
Oh, I
caught.
understand what you're saying. If you got a cell phone, it's just if we had to wait a year.
Okay, so Phil calls for the search, and he definitely says we will find stuff on this search. We're looking for a .25 auto pistol, and we're looking for a cell phone. If I stand corrected, those are two things that he knows that they're probably going to find in this search. Okay, he tells the media that. What two things do we find on the road during this search? We found a phone, and we find a .25 auto case that he says is a .25 auto case.
In Klein's working theory, based partially on evidence and partially on seemingly pure conjecture, Tom had been shot accidentally inside his truck by a school friend who was goofing around with a gun. After finding evidence that Tom's phone had last pinged off of a tower near to the football stadium late that night, where teenagers regularly hung out, Klein came to believe that Tom had decided to stretch his night right up to curfew by stopping at the football field. He believed that there were likely two other boys present, one of which had a parent in a prominent and powerful position. After the horrible accident, the boys had called for the assistance of this parent, who had in turn contacted the sheriff and pressured him into helping them to cover up what had happened. Klein posited this theory publicly, but stopped short of naming names. He pointed to the fact that search volunteers on the morning the phone was discovered had been unaware of the location they would be looking until the time they set out. Only members of the sheriff's department had the time and opportunity to plant Tom's iPhone. They did so perhaps in an attempt to divert the direction of the search. Text messages sent by Penny suggested a different and troubling version of events. Perhaps it was Tom's mother and not the sheriff that had possession of Tom's iPhone the entire time. Messages from Penny to a friend of Tom's sent earlier in the year request help determining the passcode to access Tom's phone. Sheriff Lewis was presented these texts from the person who received them from Penny. Why would Penny require the passcode to a phone that she did not have? Was it possible that she was hiding her son's phone all this time and later planted it for searchers to find? And if so, why? In August 2018, following a petition launched by Penny Meek to have the sheriff's office removed from the case, The investigation was handed over to the state attorney general's office, and the FBI, as well as the Texas Rangers, became involved. The attorney general's office inherited a confused investigation. After assessing the evidence before them, the lead investigator, Sergeant Rachel Katting, concluded that someone must be lying. So, she started polygraphing those involved. Philip Klein took a test and passed after accusations from Sheriff Lewis that he had in fact planted the iPhone in an attempt to make his investigation appear successful. The sheriff was not spared. Nathan Lewis claimed that his long-term anxiety issues would interfere with his results and that the questioning was unfairly conducted. When asked whether he was involved with the disappearance of Tom Brown, he answered negative and tested as deceptive. Penny and her husband Chris Meek also undertook voluntary lie detector tests. Tucker, Tom's brother, was said to be too distraught to take the test and not confident in the accuracy of the results. He was not pressured to take one. When asked whether they were aware of the location of Tom's body, both Penny and Chris responded in the negative, and both of them registered as deceptive. These results sent red flags to investigators, who then began pressuring Penny. Penny was directly accused of covering up the death of her son. The theory was that she had found Tom after he had committed suicide. According to this accusation, as Penny recounted, she was told that after coming upon Tom in his truck, she moved her son's body and hid evidence of the incident because she was ashamed of what he had done. Penny found the accusations ludicrous and, of course, insulting. And she offered a far simpler explanation for why she was searching for the passcode to her son's phone. She did not have the phone in her possession, but rather a deputy from the sheriff's office had requested the passcode from her. Confused as to why, since the phone was missing, she nonetheless was simply attempting to provide them with the information they had requested of her. There was one final piece of evidence found on the iPhone that would weigh in on the balance of probabilities of these varying theories. At 9:11 p.m. that night, Tom's browser history showed searches for suicide prevention helplines, but none of these numbers were ever dialed on the phone. Friends with Tom that night said that he was in good spirits, showed no signs of anything being off, and aside from listening to one or two melancholy songs, it was a light and fun evening. Sheriff Deputy Gregory found the skull of Tom Brown at about 9:30 a.m. on January 9, 2019, on Lake Marvin Road, and roughly 14 miles from where Tom's truck had been found just 2 years before. Reports that the deputy discovered the skull randomly at 2 a.m. have been disputed by the Attorney General's office.
The very, very, very big concern we have that at 2 o'clock in the morning, that a sheriff's deputy is walking around in the same area where Tom's body is found approximately a year and a half, 2 years later. And he is supposedly at 2 o'clock in the morning looking for deer antlers or deer scat, and he comes across the body. I mean, that makes no sense to any of us. We're not saying that Mr. Gregory, who was the sheriff's deputy at the time, who was terminated, subsequently terminated, we're not saying that he's a suspect, but we have extreme concerns of why this man could find a body out there. This is the same sheriff's deputy that when we did the 12-mile search from the beginning of Lake Marvin Road to the end of Lake Marvin Road kind of pushed us away from the area because they said they had another investigation going on with some drug activity.
Only partial remains were retrieved from the site. Assessments conducted at the University of North Texas found injuries consistent with blunt force trauma impact to the face and other areas, but they could not determine conclusively if this had occurred while Tom was alive or early post-mortem. In addition, it was not concluded that these injuries alone would have been fatal. Investigators inquired as to whether there could have been a gunshot wound to the head without leaving any evidence on the skull. They were told by the UNT experts that this could not have happened without indicators. Despite having finally found Tom, it remained entirely unclear what had caused his death.
It's a full-fledged homicide investigation. No matter how you look at it, it's a homicide investigation. What will happen now is that the OAG and the Texas Rangers will continue their investigation and continue to interview people and build evidence. I can't talk about the evidence out there, so please don't ask. I mean, I'm just telling you, don't.
we, on our side, if we are re-engaged, we will start a homicide investigation on this side. The first thing that we do that we know they are doing is going back over all the old information.
The Attorney General's lead investigator, Rachel Cadding, was offering little information or clarification at that point, but did state blatantly that it remained unclear if Tom's death was accidental or an act of suicide or homicide.
You have a car at least 10 miles as the crow flies from where the remains are found, 21 miles if you're going to walk along the road. You have a phone that was found in excellent condition 11 months after Thomas went missing, along with a backpack that was found several more miles down the road. And so, to me, that does not add up to no foul play.
In November of the same year, Nathan Lewis resigned his position as sheriff of Hemphill County amongst allegations that he had falsified documents and lied and exaggerated about training hours undertaken by him and his deputies. On the back of this fraud were allegations that he had also forged documentation in the Tom Brown case by submitting fake documents about security camera footage over a year and a half later to cover incompetent investigative work.
Here's what former Deputy Clapp had to say when TCOL investigators asked why Sheriff Lewis might fabricate the training records.
Because we've been through the whole Tom Brown mess and,
right,
you know, all the...
Yeah.
Well, hell, on that deal, he manufactured a supplement a year and a half after the fact. So, same deal.
So doing something like this
same
is not
deal.
A stretch.
No.
Yeah.
No, when you write reports a year and a half after, because why? Because we're getting ready to turn it all over to the Attorney General.
Yeah.
And I go to him and I say, you've got 2 pages in this thing. I've got 26.
Yeah.
You need to catch up some supplements. You need to do something. Where's your documentation?
Yeah.
In early 2021, the Attorney General's office established a cold case and missing persons unit that was tasked with reviewing the evidence of Tom Brown's questionable death case with independent experts in an attempt to discover new evidence. It had been thought that convening a grand jury and subpoenaing all witnesses to testify under oath would be a means to weed out any and all individuals who were lying, because without a doubt, someone was. The idea was scrapped, however, when it was concluded that a grand jury would be very likely to hand out indictments for various related charges in the case to multiple individuals. But, by investigator Cadding's own admission, there was nowhere near enough evidence to actually convict anyone of a crime in this case. They believed that indictments would be easily acquired despite not having enough evidence to prove guilt. So, it was determined that proceeding with a grand jury was unethical. The individuals of interest were never named, nor were the specific charges they had considered pursuing. Philip Klein, however, had no such issues pointing the finger publicly at those he felt were responsible for Tom's death. Following the release of a 249-page document from the Attorney General's office outlining their investigation, Klein held a town hall meeting in Canadian where he proclaimed he would finally reveal all the facts. There, 200 residents attended to hear the investigator reveal what he had discovered.
The OAG released a report last night which kind of, I don't know how to say it other than it's the most unprofessional report I've ever read. I'm very surprised by it. I think they were panicked as they knew we were going to release some information that's never been released about the Tom Brown case today, including a possible manner of death.
Gone was Klein's confidence in the theory of the 2 boys, the accidental shooting, and a conspiratorial cover-up by a powerful parent and the county sheriff, though he was not letting Nathan Lewis off the hook. Klein now pointed to 5 audio-recorded interviews with an incarcerated man named Chris Jones. Jones claimed that he witnessed Tom Brown being held at gunpoint by a sheriff's deputy on the night of his disappearance and at the direction of then-Sheriff Lewis.
I want you to hear what this boy says and then compare it to what I just told you, which is fact. I see some of you out there shaking your heads now. Listen to this.
What he said was, number 1, he was getting paid to play football for Canadian. Number 1. Number 2, He was told what games to forfeit, as in what games to throw or lose, or however you want to word it, and what games to win. And that there is a group of people in Canadian that gamble on the games. And if he, excuse my language, pissed off the wrong people, that is when Nathan would take him to the walking bridge, down the ladder, and threaten to kill him.
So I'm just a bit confused. You're on the record with Texas Monthly saying that Thomas was killed because of a possible prank involving a gun and being shot in the back of the head, and now you've played the audio from Chris Jones, basically that he was held hostage by law enforcement. So what really happened to Thomas, or do we know?
Great question. Let me tell it to you this way. Like I said, it's theory. We gave you a 2-hour-long presentation on the facts of the case. The theory is something happened out at the football field. Based upon the facts that we have, including Chris Jones, we didn't say he died out there. We said he was hurt out there. We know now, right here on the side of his face was crushed in. We didn't release that. We didn't tell anybody. We didn't want anybody to know. We know that we have an eye post with a pool of blood that was washed up. Now, some in law enforcement will say, you did the test wrong. You didn't we didn't do it in the dark. Well, yes, we did. It was pitch black in there. I don't know. What, did you see it? You were there watching. Your whole family. We had 10 people from her family watching us index that car. But what we got, it wasn't blood. Well, yeah, it was. That's a theory. Again, as I said, our belief is something happened to Tom while he was sitting in that car based upon the pings, where his last ping came from, right? Something happened, and our belief is, based upon the physical evidence, he went like this. And the blood pooled.
When the investigative report was released, it summarized a few additional factors under a section entitled The Unexplained and Contradictory Evidence. Tom's Dodge Durango drove in one direction at 1:10 a.m. only to turn around to another at 1:11, then disappeared for hours, in which he was presumably driving around town, only to re-emerge on camera at 5:28 a.m. During this time, Tom's phone battery died and he chose not to charge it, despite a charging cord found plugged in inside the truck. There was also no evidence either inside the truck or with Tom's remains that would point to a method of suicide if this was in fact the cause of death. Then there are questions about Tucker. Tucker drove with Deputy Gregory searching for Tom that night from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. Tucker claimed this was by request of the deputy so that he could point out the addresses of people close to Tom to check it out. The report says this claim is false. In the deputy's report, he notes that Tucker actively sought to keep him from driving into the area where Tom's truck was ultimately found. All of this is according to the Attorney General's official statements, which Klein rejects outright. He has stated that the report is nonsense and riddled with lies and false information. Much like everything in this case, it is hard to know what information to trust.
I just think that we have to know what happened, because I don't think, when you don't know what happened, it's hard to move forward. He was a good person, and he was a person that you want in your society because he was kind, he was kind-hearted, he was an encourager. For some people, he was their biggest cheerleader. And I know we miss him.
Thomas Brown's questionable death case remains an open investigation. Penny Meek still lives in Canadian despite being ostracized in many ways by her community. Most recently, in the spring of 2022, one of the many signs up around town reminding residents of Tom and his case was vandalized. Someone spray painted a single name across the text, "There is a killer among us," and that name was Penny. As for the grieving mother, she does not want to leave Canadian until she has some answers. And that was the tragic and mysterious case of Thomas Brown. Thanks for watching. I'm Kevin. This is Just Thought Lounge. I'll see you in the next one.